2, 1. Hello and welcome to a special Digital Futures Young event on interactive design. Today we have a special distinguished moderator, Philip Beesley, today with us to share his insights, observations, and thoughts on today's presentation. Virginia Melnyk and I, Gustavo Rincon, will be facilitating the dialogue. Roshni, Misbah, Yunzhu, and Elisavet from the AA. Irem from the Bartlett, Zoe, and we will follow this structure. Introductions.
Gustavo, you have a bit of connection issue. Perhaps I could take over and introduce here that we have currently an open call for our next young event after this one, which is for the theory of AI and creativity. So if you're interested in that topic and a young presenter, please submit. We also currently have an open call for our international conference on computation and robotic fabrication. This will be in China, but also online. And the conference is due in early March, but it will be available for you to watch in July, will be the actual date of the conference.
Is my connection stable enough, Virginia?
Yeah, it looks like you're getting better now. If you want to take back over.
Okay, so yeah, so before we start the Digital Futures team, I wanted to thank Virginia for all of her creativity, dedication, and energy. My colleague, Virginia Melnyk, heads her research practice and her own design consultancy firm. She has worked internationally for leading architectural firms in Beijing. She is a lecturer at Clemson University in architecture for the College of Architecture, Arts, and Humanities. Also, she's currently a PhD student at the Digital Futures International PhD program at Tongji University under the direct supervision of Dr. Philip F. Duan. Now, Virginia will introduce our panel today with a brief summarized grounding of today's presentation titled Interactive Design and Architecture. Virginia.
Thank you so much, Gustavo, for that wonderful introduction. I am Virginia Ellen Melnyk, and I'm really happy to be here to moderate this young panel on interactive design today. I am by no means an expert in this topic, but with my own research and design work, I have often built installations that did include motion sensors and interactive lighting elements to evoke user engagement. This event is a follow-up from our keynote presentations, which were probably about 2 weeks ago, hosted by Banaz Farahi, and included leading figures in the field of interactive design, such as Philip Beesley, who is also here with us today as our distinguished guest to engage in the conversation with these wonderful presenters at the end. I will quickly introduce the topic for today's panel, which is interactive design, by trying to define it in a very open-ended way so that we can still leave this topic for further discussion among the presenters and their own ideas and approaches to interactive design and what its deeper meaning is today at the end of our discussion. To me, interactive design has its roots in the feedback systems that were speculated upon in early cybernetics. Occurring at small scale, interactive design explores how our individual bodies can affect the built environment and vice versa. Within the use of sensors, micro-robotics, responsive lighting, and even more recently, engaging augmented reality and virtual reality. interactive design provides the possibilities for humans to engage within the built environment through its kinetic and responsive features. These works propose a future environment which is more sensorial and in a continuous state of change. Thank you. So we will begin our presentations today with the wonderful work of 5 teams. Some are in groups and some are working independently. All are collaborating with robotics and interactive elements in their design. Our first presenter today is going to be Irem from the Interactive Design Lab at UCL Bartlett. Her presentation is titled Instruments of Vision. Irem is an interactive media artist and architectural designer based in London and works within the intersection of art, architecture, and technology. She has exhibited work at the Barbican Center, Arts Electronica, Ugly Duck, and in the Istanbul airport. Her work deals with perception and reconfiguring the observing body and space, and particularly focusing on eye tracking experiments. We're glad to have you here with us today, Irem. So are you ready to share your screen?
Yeah, let me go ahead. Thank you for the introduction, Virginia, and thank you guys for having me here. Let's see. Okay. So I'll be talking about instruments of vision, which is a research I started at the Interactive Architecture Lab, where I graduated from 2 years ago in 2019, along with a research group. So my research deals with sort of very simple and elusive set of questions. Where do we look when we look, and what do we see when we see? So how do we perceive our environments, and how does technology shape the way we see our environments in turn? And it builds on the thought that our senses are augmented by everything that surrounds us, and not just recent technological trends, but also most ancient forms of technology, from architecture to Victorian era optical devices, and nowadays our screens and personal devices. So my work tries to understand the form in which this augmentation takes place. By looking at the relationship between humans, machines, and environments, it tries to decipher and reconstruct new strategies that will allow us to see and perceive things in different ways, and create meaningful bodily relationships that might have not occurred to us before. So it builds on the premise that our environments are visually saturated and really overwhelmed. Our perceptive apparatuses are constantly challenged, adapted, and shaped by technologies. And through some of my work, I will try to provide an alternative discourse for vision, one that proposes the observer as someone who's situated, embodied, and someone who's filtering their own environments. This goes against the belief that our eyes work like cameras. So instead, it puts forward the thought that we bring forth our own realities, and we reconstruct our environments just by the act of seeing. So the first project I developed at the lab, along with my research colleagues, Anna-Louise Dotel and Robert Wuss, was an exploration of human perception through robotic motion. So the installation uses eye tracking as an input for controlling a small robotic arm called Luna, and maps the eye movements of an observer onto the range of motion of the robot. So as the observer looks around inside this environment, the robot moves and follows her eye movements and points a light in that direction. So it's kind of like creating an extension of the observer's eye. We were inspired by methods in which optical devices stabilize and configure the observer in a space. So the viewport containing Luna is only accessible to a single observer who's looking in through this peephole. While one observer navigates Luna, other observers can also enjoy the artifacts of controller's gaze. So the voyeuristic position the observer holds while looking into this wondrous world creates some sort of a paradoxical state of embodiment, because on one side, here she's stationed in place, but at the same time, her vision is put into motion by a robotic counterpart. Our second installation takes inspiration from some of the seeds that we planted in this first project, particularly how animate we found this robotic creature called Luna, and how she sort of reminded us some of the animate qualities we see in animals, or the curious behavior we might see in animations, and more about how we project meaning onto objects. So we wanted to explore this a bit further in our second project called The Entangled Eye. In this installation, we have two robotic creatures that are engaging in a dialogue, a machinic dialogue. So Luna and Laika are situated inside an enclosed environment. And as soon as an observer steps in to sort of look at their dialogue, they stop moving. So this created a frustration in the observer and imposed sort of a resistance of information. We realized that while we were interested in some of these animate qualities of robotics and how these machinic parts can induce affective emotions in us, a lot of the feedback we got was really fascinating for us. For example, a child who was interacting with the installation at Ars Electronica said Luna was very curious looking, which was very entertaining for us. And she also said that the robot was blushing, which is quite strange to hear considering that it's made out of aluminum parts. And this was sort of the beginning premise of our design process, because when we were designing Luna and Laika, we looked at qualities that would allow the most expression. We looked at tactile ways of designing, and instead of programming behavior and designing the robot in only digital software, we decided to look at some of the tactile methods of designing and also training this robot. So we used puppeteering as a way of creating animacy in these lifelike behaviors that we wouldn't be able to achieve otherwise. And in the process, Luna and Laika became sculptable interfaces that generated machinic imagery, but also introduced a tactile and embodied dimension to otherwise machinic object. So the last project I'm going to talk about, again, builds on the research into ways of seeing and instruments of vision. It particularly looks at what happens when our visual systems are distanced from our observing bodies, and can there be such a thing called vision without a body? So the installation has three parts. The first part is where we gather eye tracking data of an observer who's situated in a particular space, looking at an architectural site, or it might be an enclosed space, and we were experimenting with how different spaces sort of generate different eye paths. So the second part of the project is where, after we collect the eye movement data, a robotic counterpart takes your place inside the space. And the third part of the installation is archiving these different eye recordings into different situated compositions. So you can see here, it's the first stage of collecting eye data through a Pepper's Ghost instrument, where you can see your eye movement inside the space. And once this is collected, then we put a robot in your place to reenact that eye path. So it was sort of investigating the subjectivity of vision and how each and every one of us look at space through unique set of eyes, and we bring our own experiences, memories, and even current mood into how we observe spaces. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you so much, Irem. That was really wonderful presentation. Our next group of presenters is actually a team of 4 stunning students from the Architectural Association. They're recent graduates and had won the thesis award for their project. and it's titled Orbis, which is an exciting little installation project. And each of them have gone on to do amazing things with their career. But this project was highlighted as the Thesis Award. It also received honorable mention from the Charette Thesis Award, published in the Architectural Journal for the Student Awards, archisearch.com, and in REBA. So I'm really happy to introduce Roshni, Misbah, Shehreen, and Yunzhu and Elisavet to present their project.
Thank you, Virginia, for that introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. All right. So to briefly introduce ourselves, I, Misbah, Yunzhu, and Elisavet are architects and computational designers from India, China, and Greece. Having recently completed our master's program at the AADRL, we would like to take you through our design research project that was conceived as a part of the Spheropolis studio. The AADRL is a work in constant progress. In method and practice, the lab provided us a platform to challenge the orthodoxies of convention in how we conceive, construct, and live within an environment. The thought that without culture and the relative freedom it implies, society, even when perfect, is but a jungle. This thought provided us with the impetus for the exploration of the future of culture. We knew that in order to address the future of culture, architecture needed to be explored through a lens that looked beyond static and conventional systems of infrastructure. Deep embedded principles of natural systems that are highly intelligent and behavior-driven provided us with great opportunity to learn and realize that architecture can offer something derived from life itself. Which led us to wonder what our future culture could look like. We then started our research to devise an agency in which humans and robots are interwoven, a system that would imbibe principles of mobility, intelligence, and self-assembly, and the idea of what the future of cultural spaces holds coaxes us to move beyond form and its redundancy.
Through our various iterations in developing a unit, we studied behaviors of packing, transformation, and flexibility in the connections and different patterns. Investigating this, we decided that a sphere is probably the best option as it combines the ease of mobility, symmetricity, and a compact packing ability being the few key features. The optimal unit would be achieved by giving the sphere 6 connection points on the 3 axial directions. This would aid it in connecting with other units and climbing up to the next layer. We also explored angle connections that were generated by a slight rotation of the leg of the connecting leg. This would aid it in forming a triangle and a pyramid based on which we ran multiple simulations and research. Our research also explores different connection options based on the number of connecting units.
Among the several tests that we conducted, the most common patterns were based on pyramids, triangles, and squares. For each system, expansion and contraction patterns took place along the force lines, therefore providing a different transformation each time. Then we started to move to structures like arcs. These structures are formed through expansion and contraction, providing opportunity to interpret each space differently. Using this transformation and specific patterns, we studied to see transformations from space to mass. Transformations happen in stages based on the various connecting legs. Each of the typologies of spaces created the time taken for assembly and the number of units required are different. Units form spaces by climbing, connecting to other units, as well as by transforming existing connections. For the structure with 90 units, it could form a space for small gatherings of people. With 40 units, it could form a shelter spaces for 1 or 2 people. The system could also perform the function to guide or direct people to a specific place. The system also responds to proximity and occupancy and expands further to accommodate more people. Larger sheltered spaces can also be created through the connection of a larger number of units. Walkways and shelters are a few among the several spaces typologies. The created structures provide a large number of opportunities for interaction.
Each unit is designed with the ability to be mobile, sense, and connect with other units. After a series of tests and experiments, we chose to proceed with a spheroidal unit which has 6 telescopic legs within it. Each has the ability to expand in 6 perpendicular directions from the center of the sphere. The rolling mechanism is situated in the core of the unit. DC motors, along with the counterweight, aid in the directional mobility of the unit. Each of the connecting legs has an electromagnet attached at the end of it, with the ability to connect to 6 other units. To introduce an extra level of flexibility to the system, each of the legs is able to rotate through the aid of springs. The highly adaptive nature of the system springs from these telescopic connections.
For the exoskeleton, we zeroed down on an optimized 3D printed triangular mesh, and we envisioned the damaged exoskeletons to be recycled through a protocycler. Our system is also incorporated with the ability to recharge itself with wireless inductive charging using the existing infrastructure in London.
We took our research further to simulate collective intelligence in our system by varying force parameters such as alignment, cohesion, and separation. Several interesting flocking patterns started to emerge. By the implementation of a simple seeker and attractor behavior in our machine learning model, a more sophisticated communication system started to emerge over time, and a more effective behavioral and clustering patterns were visible.
Looking at higher population studies, these units depict intelligent behaviors and flocking strategies. They begin to display stigmergic properties wherein agents sense and follow the other units closer to the target. These flocks also collectively move as per the displacement while being constrained by the axial mobility properties of the unit. The intelligent aspect of the system moves beyond just conventional infrastructure and contributes to more complex behaviors such as crowd segregation, creation, and the indication of safe paths. We then studied this behavior and its potential in orchestrating variable usable spaces by aggregating based on agent population density in different areas. Our system also has the ability to detect human movement and self-organize themselves to create a passage or a pathway for the user.
To add to the layers of interaction in our system, we integrated a responsive illumination system. In order to achieve an interesting play of light and shadow, we tested several iterations of geometries and materials for the exoskeleton of our prototype.
In the physical world, we tested obstacle avoidance with scale prototypes where the units detect obstacles and change direction upon doing so. They are able to respond to light as a trigger. Upon sensing a light source, the unit tends to move in its direction. Finally, we also must achieve a communication system based on target detection and movement towards these targets. For one unit attracts, the others move towards it through light communication.
The initial tests of our machine learned system were conducted to develop an effective communication within the system itself. These simulations were then tested in various environments where proximity and obstacle avoidance were coded in. Upon establishing an efficient communication within the system itself, we branched out further to establish interaction and communication with its users. Through the use of sensors, we managed to devise a light responsive system. Adding a layer of complexity, we also embedded an analysis and mapping system that would enable transformation of the space, making it conducive for use based on parameters such as time, frequency of use, and occupancy.
Through this highly interactive nature of the system, the illumination provides various kinds of interactions with its users when natural light is not present.
Finally, in conclusion, we were fortunate to be able to test out prototypes in their true ratio in the real world, and would like to give you an insight to the various responses we received. To sum up, Orbis is a behavioral assembly that opens up a possibility of a dynamic environment that is not limited to a building plan and is rather autonomous, adaptable, dynamic, and self-assembling based on real-time data. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Stunning work, really. We're going to switch gears a little bit, and next we have a presentation from Mümün Keser. He is from the University of Innsbruck, and his presentation is titled Oppositions, Simulated Embodiment and the Empathetic Spaces of Existence. Mümün is an architectural graduate and speculative artist in computational design based in Innsbruck, Austria. His research lies within data-driven design technologies and experimentation and investigations. His work places himself in the bridge between the virtual and ties that intertwine the two opposing areas. Most of his research and works are concerned with bringing media into the architectural expression and creating fully immersive, adaptive hyperspaces. Mümün, are you ready to present your work?
Yes, I think so. So I'm going to share my screen now.
Great.
All right. Okay, so the project that I'm going to present today is a part of my diploma thesis that I presented a few weeks ago, a few months ago. And the title was Oppositions, Simulated Embodiment and the Empathic Space of Existence. I want to give a brief introduction into the diploma thesis and a little bit of theoretical part, but I'm not going to go much deeper. So the work consists of improving, modifying the real spaces we inhabit by simulating a virtual representation of that space. The static real face of our environments would coexist with the dynamic forms of the virtual counterpart created by our personal contribution. This process would then open a new window into a new reality, a new space, which is ultimately a hyperreal space that is not only between two dimensions, but also intertwines virtual and real spatial dimensions. In this way, the architecture does not have to be in one form only, but it can adapt to the user and interact with us through our personal input. This can lead to a more individualized environment that enriches or improves our lives while stimulating the users. So this quote kind of shaped the whole thesis from Jan Freeman. Why is that architecture and architects, unlike film and filmmakers, are so little interested in people during the design process? Why are they so theoretical, so distant from life in general? And again, then I ask myself during the preparation or during the research and so on, the question of what if architecture begins to be an extension of our body, or better said, what happens when we use our existence as a bridge between architecture and our body? In this case, architecture should not deal with the construction of a building, but rather be considered as bodybuilding. Architecture as a body can be enhanced as room to grow and the possibility to free itself from the functional enslavement from the users. It could not only adapt to the user and his or her needs, but it would also maintain a physical and mental proximity to the user. So the project is not only about the relationship between virtual and the real, but also about the search for new ways to implement immaterial digital qualities into the physical and material-based world of architecture. So the simulations, or rather the virtual phase, can be seen as a medium in their dynamic character and their constantly changing architectural expression. So for that, I had many ideas about where can this be used and stuff like that. And the idea was kind of introduce this project into the, how should I say it, the really, the topic about remote working, flexible living or flexible working topics. Especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, we are forced to live like that in our home offices and so on. So then the question popped up, what happens when the place you work and the place you live end up being the same place? So the need for an additional space would rise, and we would crave for alternative experience other than being at home or being in a home office. If you perform many different activities in the same location and add work to them, you may experience some productivity issues. So what happens if the space we work or live in can also be the space we decompress? If we use simulation as a space generating apparatus, we don't even have to go anywhere to free ourselves from the feeling of being at home. When material qualities merge with immaterial qualities, we can create our own spaces around us, and we can immerse ourselves in another place that still resembles the real one. So through mixed reality, we can merge the virtual and the real and obtain an immersive interactive space that can help us to get distracted, take a break, or even if you have lost track, to regain our spirit. So the whole project was, the main idea was to create this this relationship between this user and the tool. The tool is the experience. And these two should kind of work together and kind of go through the same process. From simulation, experience, and learning, they get stimulated and they have to adapt again and in a loop, do this process on and on and on. And each time they learn more, and each time they know each other more, and so on. So for that, I came up with a design approach, which was based on point clouds as an input. Point clouds, I use point clouds as a visualization of the real space for orientation purposes. But another thing about point clouds is they are data which can be manipulated and used for many other things. And for that, I used these point clouds in an algorithm where I generated vector fields. And this algorithm was structured in 4 different steps. Now here, for example, the input, when I put the point cloud into the algorithm, it comes out like this after 4 steps, and these are the 4 steps. First, I have to drink something. So the first phase was calculating the gradient vector calculation based on density of the point cloud. So the way you scan your environment is also really important here. And then I feed in the personality type data as a phase 2, where I manipulate the vector field by addition. And here I manipulate the blur value from the base vector field. And on phase 3, I used emotion type data. where I multiplicate the vector field by using emotion data, the extracted emotion data. And at the end, I use user activity to finalize the vector field to get the final output. And I'm going to just go pretty quickly through this each step. Here you can see the vector field generation, how I have done it based on density. And here I also use the blur value to give on each point a value, a default value. And this is pretty important on the next step on the personality type data. And here I used MBTI personality types, where there are 16 different possible combinations. And I converted them into vectors, and I used these vectors as the default value for the vector field. So each starting point of the vector fields will be defined by the personality type data. And if you process them all, you will get 16 different type of simulations. And phase 3 emotion data, here I used Plutchik's emotion wheel. Again, pretty straightforward emotion representation, which is pretty well known. And here I extracted two types of data: emotion strength based on the position of the emotion on the wheel, and the emotion pole, the negative and positive emotions according to Plutchik. The upper ones are the positive ones, and the above are the negative ones. And here, when I mix up these ones with the personality type data and the first phase, then I would get 128 different type of simulations. And here is also how things can change. For example, through emotion pole, also the appearance of the vector field changes too, and the strength and the turbulences, all this kind of stuff. And at the end, I used user activity data, and user activity can be collected in many different ways: through motion flow with moving images or videos. You can collect motion user activity data, or you can use smartphone sensors. And with an AI algorithm, you can kind of create a system which can recognize as different type of activities, which I did. I tested this out too, where I collected my own data with my own smartphone and processed it through the system and feed it into the algorithm. And at the end, I get the final output of the space when I kind of mixed them all up with each other. So at the end, what I did was I implemented all these steps into an experience, into an engine. And here I had the same inputs like previously. At first, I used this corridor as an input. I used the gradient vector velocities as an input first. And then here I used a VR headset. And then you kind of created this mixed reality experience where you can move around, change some parameters, and check out the outcome of each choice of the user. And here inside, you can also change it by yourself too. You can either dial in before or inside of the experience. And why is it so? And here are some other images. And for the final, and here you can see the different type of outcomes of the spaces based on different type of personal parameters. On the right below, you can see the parameters. And now at the end, I also want to show the final exhibition area where I scanned the exhibition area where I presented my diploma. And here I did the same thing and kind of created this experience. And to finalize everything, I have some clips to show. This is the corridor experience. I also have a hand tracking for user activity data. And as you can see, on some point, the simulation starts. And you can just, when you move your hands based on the distance between hands, you can also change the appearance of each vector too, especially the colored ones. And here you can dial in the exact data types that I told you before. And now, for example, when you play around with your hand, you can change the appearance. And I also have the other experience where I let some people use this space. And this was kind of funny because it was pretty accurate. So you can go around, touch everything. You can sit on any kind of box, and in real time, you can change also the parameters and the appearance of the whole space. And this was pretty, how should I say, pretty creepy for some users, because they felt pretty, after 1 minute or so, they felt like it was kind of real. They were inside and they felt everything and so on and so forth. But I was giving them instructions like, go try this out, do this, change some parameters. And they were like, oh, I can hear you, but I can't see you. But it feels so real, but it's not real. So it was kind of funny to see that reactions. And yeah, it's kind of it. But the one thing what bugged me about this whole setup was that the point cloud has to be scanned beforehand. For that, I also implemented a depth camera into the experience too, where I scanned it in real time too, and kind of had a visualization or the simulation going on. But this has also some kind of issues, like, for instance, the image size doesn't match with the size of the field of view of the headset. So you have these blank areas of your screen. And here you can see there's also the intensity changes with distance of the points, and also the brightness changes. So the further away the points are, the smaller are the cubes that I implemented it in the simulation. And also the brightness also changes. So here you can see it instantly, or it scans also in real time the whole space or whole environment and changes its appearance. So thanks for listening. I hope I didn't talk too much. So thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Mümün. You were a little bit over time, but that's okay, because those videos were quite stunning to watch. So we're really glad that you shared them with us. Moving on to our next presentation, we have Mona Ghandi from the University, or Washington State University. Her presentation is titled Parasympathy, a space of empathy and active compassion. Mona is an architect and researcher and educator at Washington State University, where she leads the Morphogenesis Lab. She has extensive experience in emerging technologies and advanced innovative design, with looking at alternative models for building delivery and dealing with architecture and emotive intelligence. She engages with AI, machine learning, robotics, and adaptive architecture. Her work is widely recognized. She has received several awards, exhibited nationally and internationally, and has also had her work published in several places, including the New York Times, Washington Magazine, and the Architectural Record. Welcome, Mona. We look forward to your presentation. Are you ready?
Yeah, thank you very much, Virginia, for the nice introduction, and thanks for having me here. I'm going to share my screen, and let me know if you can see it full screen. Is it working? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I would like to start with my research. My research focuses on architecture of emotive intelligence, which examine the role of artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and adaptive environment in improving well-being in the buildings. And through artificial intelligence and interactive design, I seek to create spaces that can learn from user behavioral pattern in real time, enhance environmental quality, and promote more flexible human-centered design. My research process of inquiry relies a singular objective: to reconcile the relationship between human and architecture, and to redefine this relationship as one of emotional empathy and active compassion. In my lab, we entertain the possibility of an architecture that can possess the qualities of human states of being, a state of constant change, flux, and adaptation. Current examples of adaptive design range from those responding to environmental forces and climate to those reacting to human engagement, motions, and sound. However, the potential of adaptive architecture in improving our psychology, thoughts, and emotion are areas yet to be further explored. Now the question is, how can we create a reciprocal relationship between human mind, body, and the built environment as they shape one another? Will the space be able to convey information about the feeling and be the extension of our mind and body? In the human's body, the parasympathetic nervous system relaxes the body and slows many high energy functions. This project, Parasympathy, tends to enhance and mitigate the user's mental health and well-being by adjusting the space according to the real-time mood of the user. Parasympathy is an emotive intelligence interactive installation that initiates a dialogue between the physical space and emotional state of people. In this project, we aim to animate space with emotions and thoughts and use emotions as a means of interacting with the built environment and modifying atmospheric conditions. It's a cyber-physical sensory environment that detects human emotion from biological and neurological data in real time and translates its data into environmental changes that adequately respond to the emotions. The project had three objectives. The first one was measure and analyze biodata to detect emotions using affective computing. The second one was map and illustrate emotional data. And the third one was link people's emotion and cognition to the built environment with real-time responses. So using an experimental research method, this study explores the role of artificial intelligence, machine learning, affective computing, wearable technologies, and sensory spaces to create emotionally responsive adaptive spaces. The project equipped users with smart devices such as Empatica E4 and 8-channel OpenBCI EEG headset that can collect users' real-time biological and neurological data within the realms of IoT. Preliminary analysis of the differences between the biological measurements find them to be sufficiently distinct to allow machine learning algorithms to distinguish between them and detect emotions. This pilot study was conducted by collected biological data from 20 students for 3 years, providing around 90,000 distinct data points to develop the machine learning algorithm capable of detecting emotion in real time from biological data. Through comparing the accuracy of different machine learning algorithms, we selected decision tree with the most accuracy in recognizing emotions, and the data for training the machine learning model are being still collected both in the lab and out of the lab. So since emotional neurology is a fairly new area in neuroscience, and it's challenging to extract the exact emotions just from the brain because of the complex system of that, we developed a machine learning algorithm that can correlate information gathered from biological data with neurological performance metric to decode a distinct emotion. So a mobile phone app was developed to present the biosignal changes and detected emotion. It also allows for active learning for continuous improvement of the machine learning model. This app has the history of emotion and can be used even for individual mental health monitoring in real time, independent of this project. In this phase, in the third phase, translating those data to the changes in the built environment, we had a great study on the effective items of the environment to the emotions, and we found the colors and patterns are the most the best stimuli for the emotions. In this phase, we mapped the cognitive and emotional state to a pattern and lighting changes. And also we correlate those cognitive and emotional state with structural changes of the installation. The state space method approach in combination with machine learning technique was able to detect changes in biomarkers through communicating with the server, mapping a relationship between a person's feeling and the changes in the color of the installation. A change in the latest stored emotional state triggered a change in the color of the installation. The interactive color grading installation consists of 4 wooden panels with retractable modules through which colored LED lights are evenly diffused, creating 90-degree semi-private space responding to the user's emotion. And that was installed in a gallery in Idaho to have interaction with the public. The kinetic color lighting modules are made from acrylic with an integrated adaptive system that allow them to move and create different pattern lighting effects. We use Raspberry Pi devices to pull the emotional data from the cloud and control the actuators and create different patterns and colors. And taking advantage of AI and adaptive system, this project places the user at the center of this experience as they find out the effect is contingent upon their emotional involvement. Through this process, the users are given an indication of their emotional state and is therefore able to make a necessary measure to either enhance, mitigate, or simply become aware of responsive emotion. Here, space is considered as equal partner in cognitive process of environmental modification necessary for comfortable and generally sustainable living. This approach blurs the line between the physical, digital, and biological spheres and creates spaces that can feel and sense their surrounding and can be controlled by the user's mind and feelings. The application of this system has the potential to be utilized as a method of remedial therapy, particularly for the children with autism and PTSD patients. This approach is a framework to transform the built environment into living organism that is network, sensitive, sympathetic, adaptive, and yet in constant communication with its user. In taking this data-driven approach, designer can become part of a new paradigm in which design is not limited to the physical environment, but is rather understood as an interaction between the informational, biological, and physiological as a cyber-physical spaces. Now let's take a look at the real-time emotion interaction with the installation. Through using the wearable smartwatch, and you can see the mapping of the emotion on the phone and how the space is responding to that. See the color of the environment are being changed based on the different emotion detected in real time. And with that, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. I think that we're seeing such a great range of presentations today. Our last presentation is up next. So viewers on YouTube and Bilibili and Facebook, please feel free to write questions in the comments because we're going to get to the discussion portion of our event very soon. Our last presenters are Zoe and Marina from the UCL Bartlett. They are both members of the Interactive Design Lab at Bartlett. Their presentation is titled Biofeedback as an interactive tool for audience engagement in VR performances. Both of them have an interest in the relationship between immersive experiences, technology, and the performing arts. Their recent work engages VR environments and augmentation of human senses, also engaging mixed perception and reality environments. They also work within the realm of narrative and entertainment engagement. So I'm really look forward to this final presentation. Are you ready to present your work and share your screen?
Yeah, thank you, Virginia, for the introduction. And thanks for having us today. Let me share my screen. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us. We are Zoe and Marina, and we're going to present you Biofeedback as an interactive tool for audience engagement in VR performances. We are both trained architects, and we have worked in various art practices. And our work focuses on the intersection of built environment and human interaction technologies. Apart from architecture, we share interests around theater and scenography, and that's why we joined the Design for Performance and Interaction program at the Bartlett. Today we're going to present you our final design project that was an opportunity to reflect upon ideas of audience engagement in immersive environments. So our final design project, it's Inhibition. It's an immersive performance based on Adolfo Casares' novel, The Invention of Morel, that questions conventional theater by dissolving the roles of performers and audiences. It's a combination of VR technology, biofeedback, and multi-layered audiovisual stimuli to encapsulate the dynamic relations between the physical and the virtual space. So our theoretical challenges. According to Dixon, virtual reality is a medium that can amplify the theatrical experience in terms of visual spectacle, imaginary worlds, transportative space, and audience immersion. It also brings attention to the body proprioceptive senses, such as the awareness of the position and movement of the body, especially when there is a slippage between what the body feels in the physical space and what actually sees in the virtual simulation.
So, responding to this alienation of the body, our aim was to explore different ways of designing a collective experience which enhances embodiment and reconciles the body with space. Driven by the self-isolation during the lockdown, we started exploring ideas around spatial boundaries and physical constraints. We looked for metaphors to express those ideas, and we came up with the notion of the island, because it was widely used as a place of exile and remoteness. The novel that we chose takes place in a deserted island. The story is about the journey of a fugitive and his experience there. He encounters a group of strange visitors that he cannot interact with and starts wondering about whether he hallucinates and if his perception of reality is real or not. So we analyzed the book's narrative, and we pinned down the key events to construct our own narrative for creating a 10-minute performance. The story unfolds in 3 scenes. The first scene is the island, his confinement. The second one is the mysterious visitors and his alienation. The last one is the sun and moon and his consciousness. Sorry, yes. Inhibition is a combination of the physical installation and a VR experience with 3 participants. The main participant is a VR user, and the other 2 are the observers. The virtual environment is also projected in space. A voiceover plays along with different sounds. Each scene focuses on a different key point of the narrative and has visuals that is inspired by the book. Also, each scene is controlled. The control is given either to the VR user or to the viewers.
Biofeedback was our main tool of interaction in this performance. We experiment with different sensors that capture the common and uncommon senses to create this gradient on how the participant and the viewers control the visual output, highlighting the unconscious effect over the performance. The participants navigate to the space with a sensory perception beyond their daily experience, as they are more aware of their body, specifically breath and gestural movement, expanding their ways of seeing. At the beginning of our research, we tried to evaluate the biodata, but afterwards we decided that our focus wasn't to analyze them in a scientific way and use them as an absolute tool, but rather to see them as an artistic exploration to enhance the phenomenology of the body's experience in space. So the main participant wears a VR headset and a vest in which different biosensors are attached on, such as GSR, which measures the conductivity of the skin, the heartbeat sensor, and the respiratory belt that captures the breath, encouraging the physiological response of the participant's body to the visual output. The viewers were also vested with the heartbeat sensor, and also their movement is captured in real time. The biodata alter the virtual environment, shaping each other's space. They affect the color, the size, and the position of points in the point clouds and particles, or even the scale of the virtual environment.
So here is how the performance unravels into 3 scenes. The first part is the arrival on the island and the exploration. We collect the biofeedback only from the VR user who affects his own experience. In the second scene, the 2 viewers become an active part of the performance. The main participant realizes that there are more people in the room, as their figures are rendered in the virtual environment and manipulated by their heartbeat. The third scene is a pre-recorded animation The third scene is a pre-recorded animation that shows 2 suns and 2 moons in a more abstract way. And we moved from more representative virtual environment in the first scene to more abstract visualizations in scene 2 and 3. In that way, we also wanted to enhance the state of the protagonist that starts to questioning his own existence. As we would like to amplify the metaphor of overlapping realities, we chose a semi-transparent mirror that has different properties depending on the light conditions in the installation. It either acts as a mirror, depriving visual connection between the participants, or as a transparent surface. This performance is not addressed to professional performers, but to general public, because we wanted that every single participant would create his own subjective experience of reality.
And here we're going to share your final film. Let me know if there are issues with the sound.
Last night, for the 100th time, I slept on this deserted island. Today, I woke up to a miracle. The merchant had said, there is only one possible place for a fugitive like you. This uninhabited island, built around 1924 and then abandoned. But anywhere, the world is an impeccable hell for fugitives. Only the vegetation seemed abundant. The plants overtake each other with urgency, with more urgency to be born than to die. Now the grassy hillside has become crowded with people who dance, stroll up and down, and swim in the pool as if this was a summer resort. I believe they did not even see me. But here I am, without provisions, hidden in the smallest, least habitable part of the island. She is one of these people. From my hiding place, I watch her watching the sunset every afternoon. There are no hallucinations or imaginings here. I know these people are real, at least as real as I am. The following day, 2 moons and 2 suns were visible. Probably they were a kind of mirage. Finally, I had proof that my relationship with the intruders was a relationship between beings on different planes. Reality now appears to be changed, unreal. It occurs to me that these people were never concerned with me at all. To the person who nails his diary and then invents a machine that can assemble these joint presences, I make this request. Find them in me. Let me enter the heaven of their consciousness. It will be an act of pity.
Oops. And that's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I absolutely love that video at the end. I could watch it over and over, honestly. So now we'll have a panel discussion with all of the presenters from today. So if you could turn your cameras back on and begin to engage. I know I have quite a few questions. We also have Philip Beesley here, and I'm sure after these presentations, he also has several questions. Hopefully our viewers from YouTube and Bilibili will also be posing some questions. But I would like to just start off by congratulating each and every one of you on your amazing works. I think our audience is very lucky to see this work together, since it really approaches the wide range that interactive design covers. We have from robotic things to things that have very specific sensors to your body and emotions, eye tracking, and AR, VR stuff. So I really appreciate this range of things. I don't know if you would like me to start off with a question, or if anybody else has a burning question. Philip, do you have a burning question?
Well, Virginia, I wonder if it would be okay if I make a few remarks.
Yes, of course.
Oh yeah, go right ahead, Philip.
I hope that's okay if I actually take a couple of minutes to comment, because I find this range of work extraordinarily moving and important. And so that tempts me to make some basic framing remarks out of deep respect for all of you that meditate on some of the possibilities that you're touching, and also that raise some thorny questions as well. So perhaps this can be a helpful provocation as well, as a mark of deep respect for what you're doing. What I can say is that the work that you have just shared has struck me as some of the most important work in the world today. Why do I say that? I say that because each of you shows a kind of humility and care that speaks of the deepest kind of involvement. I think empathy registered in every single one of these presentations. Sensitivity was an explicit word in your presentations. This suggests that the humility that you carry can be accompanied by some confidence about the responsibility that you are also carrying for shaping the built environment. And that confidence is no small thing, because the world has changed today. There's been such surging kinds of possibility in the last decades, the ability to shape our environment in an exquisite set of dimensions, with the completion of the Genome Project, with the completion, apparently, of the general theory of relativity, with the ability to address new materials, with the extraordinary invasion of complex data, of global capitalism, of the questioning of agency itself, the questioning of truth itself. That kind of confidence and opportunity is so very tested today that it counts as a kind of an inflammation as well. And so I think that confidence becomes a very important quality to build in something, perhaps, I'm sorry that I'm being a bit emotional in this, but I hope you'll forgive me, something akin to perhaps the Hippocratic Oath for architects. If we say first do no harm, then surely the building of the environment carries that kind of responsibility. And as these dimensions are woven in, imbricated somehow, that word that lovely means kind of like a complete entangled riddling of things, I think that what you are doing is quite literally bringing in the craft of making life into architecture. That word has resonated in many of your presentations. You've used the terms from biology, certainly the terms of sentience. Perhaps it is time to call this living architecture as a collective discipline. There are practical steps for this. We don't need to reject the Roman writer Vitruvius in thinking about permanence and use and beauty. In fact, those kind of Western classical things, colonial as they are, local as they are in one culture rather than embracing all cultures, are useful. But perhaps beyond that, the minimum ingredients for life are ones that we can use in building the new discipline that you are making such profound contributions to. If they are the minimum ingredients of life that we can agree on, then maybe we could talk about scaffolds and compartments and information and metabolism and perhaps degrees of consciousness as well. So perhaps there's a new triad there, that is to say, compartment and information and metabolism, that replaces an older triad for Vitruvius. But this is deeply contested because the boundary between nature and technology, if you are opening that boundary, if you are in fact riddling and entangling our inert mineral work of architecture within life, within nature, then we risk violence as well. And we risk violation, and we risk carelessness. And so how do we traverse that boundary? I'm reminded that Joseph Rickwert, the marvelous writer of The Idea of the Town, spoke about how the twin of Romulus, the founder of the town, was killed. Remus was killed for traversing that very boundary between inside the world of technology, the world of the polis, and outside the wilderness, the world of nature. Crossing that boundary, crossing the threshold, was an act of danger and violation and irresponsibility. What an incredibly contested thing it is to bring these worlds together. Let me comment about each of your works because I find it so very moving. I mean, Irem, the way you spoke about the artifacts of the observer's gaze made me think of someone who's actually present here today, Neil Leach's lovely meditations on camouflage, on this curious sense of a threshold where we can see, and perhaps we're even careful enough to call it the act of a voyeur, but then the kind of lovely kind of bubbling space, the fluxing space where the artifacts of perception were made available to each other, just made for an astonishingly precise kind of work. And I really agreed with you looking at the animations of puppetry and working with the marionettes craft in order to find kind of an exquisite kind of tectonic. I love the sense that the robot might be blushing. And I love the kind of space of eye tracking becoming not just a reductive thing in which that's being pulled out of me selfishly by say an advertiser who wants to know if I'm looking at the advertisement, but really turning into a kind of mutual dance in which I can see what you're doing and you can see who I'm looking at, and this becomes a lovely kind of fundamental space. The Orbis project was absolutely striking as well. Roshni, Misbah, Elizabeth, especially to me in your use of the term stigmergy, that is this kind of extraordinary flocking crowd behavior. And I've almost never seen such a beautiful kind of expansive sense of the addressing of space itself. In earlier work around the kind of structuring of architecture, think of the structuralists, think of the middle of the 20th century, that space has been deeply, deeply contested the fear of the rat's maze, you know, of kind of hemming us into careless walls and telling me, okay, you can turn left or you can turn right, but that's it, you know, and you better choose. And I'm going to push you through as well. That kind of dreadful kind of determinism was turned absolutely on its head. And I saw you actually approaching something as rich almost as the periodic table in the kind of lovely kind of saturated space. It made me think that perhaps space itself could be named a much older term, ether. Or perhaps we could use a term from biology like pluripotency, that kind of extraordinary kind of saturated fertility in which space could move forth. I think you made an extraordinary contribution in that work. Mümün, the building on that sense of the stigmergy or the kind of saturated space of the preceding group, I was absolutely struck by the fulsome quality that you created, as if space was completely addressed in terms of where we'd been, but also where we could go, with your use of the particle fields and the experience engines as being a kind of a thickening of space and possibility itself, as a very distinct practical medium for navigating in. You spoke about some difficulty as well in people becoming disoriented or perhaps becoming emotional, even perhaps revolted or frightened in that work. And I think that only underlies the extraordinary potency of this kind of possible intermediate space, which greatly expands our own bodies. It made me think that perhaps something like our sinuses, which have the ability to detect, say, molecules of interaction, you know, with the kind of extraordinary sensitivity that we have in older senses, might be translated somehow into a whole body tactile, expanded parasympathetic way of navigating the world. Rather, even, you know, the kind of world that the pheromone cloud certainly inhabits, but that we are so have such limited consciousness of. And I love the sense of the visualization of it, and that speaks directly to Mona's extraordinary work in emotional intelligence being made tangible through your work, Mona, with the open EEG. I noticed that you're using the open BCI system, the open brain computer interface system, and the proprietary software as well, but working with this as a fundamental kind of medium and an instrument in our architecture strikes me as an extraordinarily important craft that can be available to us, where we can know what we are thinking, where we can understand that emotion is a deep terrain, that it's far from a reductive thing which just somehow awkwardly accompanies us as we make conscious actions, but rather becomes a medium, a viable, mutual, reciprocal medium that we can traverse. And opening it into a language, I think, is an extraordinarily important contribution. And Zoe and Marina, I was so very struck, and I was delighted that you somehow wrapped all of this work together in your meditation on the Morale book and in your creation of your own myth that tracked through that, and then it was as if you created something akin to, say, Tirani's lovely recapitulation. Giuseppe Tirani, the mid-century or early century Italian architect who took Dante's work into a new kind of journey that took us down and then up again into a kind of active consciousness. Of the beautiful myth, the Danteum by Tirani, reminded me of what you're doing. In other words, as an act of architecture, as a deliberate act of architecture in which fiction and possibility and projection and the past becomes a kind of deliberate framing work. And then at the end, to my delight, you offered it as a film, which I think Terrence Malick in his best work, like The Thin Red Line or The New World, the lovely filmmaker in which the outer world is accompanied by a deep personal meditation and a voicing in which sheer embodied involvement allows the work to be vulnerable and to be available in mutual exchanges as offered. I think that was really an extraordinarily effective way of developing this work. So I hope those comments suggest something of the respect that you deserve and the support that you need in this work. I think it's urgent, important work. I think it's beautiful. So let me conclude my remarks with a question. I think we might agree that we have found ourselves, we, the planet, together in something akin to war. The limits of our ability to be alive are being tested. It's frightening. This raises a question of how architects can respond and what we can do. And the medium that you're offering here requires exquisite care because of the power that you're unlocking. It tests the limits of consciousness itself. It could also be said to be a luxury, to be the kind of outer edge of architecture, which might seem like something that's better for peacetime or better for calm or better for periods of retreat where we can sit inside a sanctuary and concentrate inside a laboratory. And that kind of retreat is necessary for certain stages of our development. Certainly it's necessary for a baby's development. We could say that the gestation of a human species in the building of agency needs to take decades. That something that used to take 5 years, then became 10 years, then became 15 years, then became 20 years, and now becomes 30 years perhaps, and that's not long enough either. If we look at the kind of stress and the polarization that results from asking for mature responsibility and guilt and ethics to be imposed too quickly. And I think you're working with very, very powerful medium. And so my question is it reasonable to say that the medium that you are working with here does require glacial qualities, slow qualities of time, so that the exquisite fineness of what you're discovering can emerge? Or is there such urgency that we should implement this now and figure it out along the way and fly the plane while we're building it? This is in some way a question about whether art is possible during wartime. I'd love your reflections on that, and I hope I'm not placing that in too solemn a cast, because above all, I want to say that your work evinces joy. So thank you for it.
Thank you, Philip, for your wonderful reflections and the very insightful questions. I would invite all the panelists to comment or to I don't know. Let's have a discussion.
Okay,
it's a very hard. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mona. Okay. Thank you so much, Philip, for your comments and amazing eye on our work. So you mentioned a few things that stuck me: sympathy, compassion, and humility that you identified as the overarching principle underlying all of our works. So I wanted to go off of that to answer your question. I do think there's an urgency to respond, even though our planet's fragile in every sense now, politically, socially, health-wise, in every sense probably. But also the technology that we're working with is kind of has a temporal dimension where we might not have the same software maybe next year. So there's one side of the technocentric explanation where we need to act like urgently as soon as we produce something. But then there's also the other side of relevance. For example, Marina's work and your group's work, you deal with confinement. And I feel like this is something so important to talk about, especially now. And I love that you guys were able to produce this experience under these conditions. And it must have been difficult at the lab without the workshop and all the circumstances. So I think we do have ideas that will contribute to a more positive agenda that is based on this humility. So yeah.
Oh, Irem?
Hello?
Yeah, you were saying?
Oh yeah, sorry, there was a lag. So yeah, I think there is definitely an urgency. I would go for the acting on things now kind of approach, but I do understand the gestation period, and that's very interesting to think about as well.
Mona, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, actually, it was in the same direction as Irem mentioned, but I want to just add to that. I don't want to repeat it. I'm going with the urgency of those. I mean, all of these are newborns. They are. We are all working really hard to understand or explore new, medium to add value to their spaces or the interaction with their spaces and the architecture. But considering our current, political, social, economical, and everything else, I think that level of sensitivity and compassion is kind of required at this time. But what doesn't let us to make that happen immediately? I think it's not just about the technology that is in a constant, paradigm and change, and it's really hard to keep with the pace of that, but also with the observation or the understanding of the society and the people and the community, that in many cases, at least in my research, I can see that things seems scary. They don't want to be that much involved. It seems really futuristic. It seems really like the sci-fi, scary movie that they don't want to deal with. But I mean, that's my personal experience. When I decided to go in this direction in the research, I always had this question for myself, that what would be that boundary between the technology, as Philip talked about, that when you pass it and when you not, and what would be the side effect of that. And I think for me, I came to the conclusion that this is happening. And technology is, going in a really fast pace. And if we just want to ignore that, we are not solving any challenge or any stress or any concern that we have with. It's better to know what it's doing and to see what our concern is and to find a way to use it in a way that we can mitigate our concern. So if you are talking about the robots and lack of emotion and compassion, so how you can use the technology as a tool to address those concerns and bring it back, that emotion and compassion and, sensitivity that you are afraid of losing that. So I think there is a really big contrast between what it can do and what it can not do, or how it can be scary or how it can be lovely. And I think what was interesting in all of this project is that I could see a very interesting, sensitive, emotive approach in all of these robotics, artificial intelligence, all those emerging technologies that might be interesting, but in the same time, very lovely. You can use it as a puppet, you can interact with it, you can feel it, you can, be in it, you can create it. So I think it's very interesting to see that I think what we are doing, and I think it's important to do, is to explore the potential and see how they can lead in a right direction to eventually improve our lives and quality of well-being and mental health.
I think with respect to our project, I would agree with Mona and Irem. I would agree that there is an urgency, a certain urgency right now, and it's required for us to implement these systems. And I'm I think me as well as my team, we're quite convinced by the idea of the urgency and how it is accepted in today's world. Because when we tested our physical prototypes in the real world, we were quite apprehensive at first to see how people would respond to it in the open environment, where it looks quite alien with a robot that looked like that wouldn't be accepted so quickly. People would move away or be scared. But quite surprisingly, we had very positive feedback, and we had people coming and interacting with it, willing to play with it, and looked at it more as a part of the environment rather than alien to it. Except for animals, we weren't able to convince the animal aspect of it. It still seemed to scare away puppies. But we were really happy that we had positive interaction and feedback. So it isn't too far from reach where robots could be part of the human environment, and the boundary between the two would be blurred real quick. Thank you. And thank you so much for your comments, Philip. It was really appreciated. We all love your work and we admire your work. Thank you.
Philip, I forgot to say that was amazing. Thanks so much for rephrasing our work in a very amazing way. Thanks.
Colleagues, thank you. Neil Leach has offered a general question to us, and I wonder whether someone could phrase that. I think you can see it. Would someone volunteer to just to offer that to the group?
Yeah, I think so. Neil asks, well, first he says, "Beautiful work, everyone today. Congratulations." Building on what Philip was saying earlier, Neil would like to know whether any of you would be willing to offer a redefinition of the discipline of architecture. What is the mission of the discipline of architecture today? And I believe, Roshni, you do have a good answer for this already, but anyone can answer.
Sure. So to briefly give an idea of our opinion of that, through our research, we realized that before our research, we looked at architecture through more closed doors, like how Philip said, we looked at it through limited possibilities. But when we started moving behind walls and spaces that constricted our imagination, we realized that architecture moves beyond form and redundancy. So I think that's the need of the hour, where we experience architecture through different media and not limited to forms. So that's what we try doing through our project, to not have to require various space typologies through permanence typologies, but have a more dynamic environment that adapts and changes with the requirements. Thank you.
Does anyone else have an answer to that question of what is the mission of the discipline of architecture today, and how do we redefine what the discipline of architecture is?
I think from my perspective, I think the new urban architecture is right now formed by interactions of art, technology, and design. And we've all expressed through our projects, this is being done by explorations in the new digital and technological fields, while still retaining aspects of compassion and care, like Philip has mentioned. So I think this is what we're all moving towards, just trying to better the environment and adding something of value. Thank you.
Yes, and I would also like to contribute that I think that this use of technological features that we are able to use right now, it's also a way to bring architecture to be more engaging to everyday people, and I think that we can communicate stories that need to be told for multiple people and multiple users of spaces. So I am really fascinated by this aspect of technology that can bring in architecture.
I would also like to thank Philip for his nice comments about the old projects, and I will also congratulate each one of you. The projects were also awesome and pretty informative for me too. And I think about the question from Neil, what is the mission of discipline of architecture today? I think the quote that I showed in my presentation kind of describes it a lot, because most of the time, especially architecture historically or in the last years, mostly functions as kind of building a building, so planning a building, and the user has to adapt to that building and kind of find its way. And it's not that of person-oriented that much, individual-oriented, but mostly of a mass-oriented. And I think, especially when you look at how social media works or our daily lives work, we kind of force, or each one of us has this digital footprint based on our actions and user activity in social media. And based on that, our experience in social media changes how we kind of see things. The advertisement has been adjusted to our kind of searches and stuff like that. And I think, especially in my project, my idea was to bring this into architecture. What if we use this kind of data that social media uses to make our digital footprint to create spaces and kind of make architecture individual and kind of person-based. And I think we as architects nowadays, we have to kind of start to adapt to the technological advancements, and each architect has to somehow have the knowledge and have to know how some certain things function, because nowadays architecture is not only about planning a building and making plans, but going further than that. And yeah, that's actually it. I hope it makes sense.
And I just want to add, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think architecture should be alive, like a living organism. It should be network, it should be sensitive, and it should be adaptive. There is no other way that could catch up with the flux and changes that is happening these days if it cannot catch up and be network sensitive and adaptive.
Yeah, exactly.
I have another question kind of going off of this idea of the living architecture. Mostly when, Irem, you were speaking about the installation at Ars Electronica where the small child said something like, oh, the robot was blushing, right? And this kind of projection of our emotions or emotions into the built environment or the robotics. And I'm wondering if any of the other projects like Orbis or Mona, through your work, when the built environment starts to have emotions, and how do we start to project those emotions on it? And do we start to feel empathy for it because we start to begin to feel it is a living thing, or maybe it feels sad, or the robots themselves are feeling something and we can kind of engage with them on a new emotional level?
I think definitely. I mean, that's part of the sense of belonging when you have that type of emotional interaction. I don't know if you guys are using iRobot for cleaning the house or not, but I literally can see different behavior happening every day based on the mood of the robot. So I do have, it's like the pet, and I can feel it and he can feel me, and there is a very interesting mutual interaction between us. So as long as that emotional exchange happen, even with the glass that you every day use and have your coffee there, or with the robot, which is again way more alive rather than the glass that you use, it definitely creates that sense of belonging and create that empathy between things. And as I'm talking about it, I'm taking goosebumps. I really think that I always wish that what if our building can sense? What if we can feel each other? Because we are spending 90% of our time in our built environment. So why they cannot be alive? Why they cannot sense and why they cannot interact? That was something that was always a challenge for me, and I try to address that or contribute to it as I can.
I wonder if I could raise a question that comes out of the responses that I've just heard, in the sense that some of the offerings that I've heard you each meditate on involve a kind of an expansion, that is to say, we have individual senses, now we have extrasensory perception. Things have been mineral, things have been responsive, things have been mechanical, now they can come alive. This sense of stepping forward into a radically greater range of ability as a kind of well, yeah, let's call it increase, perhaps. Now, I suspect that the answer to my question is embedded in your work, and perhaps in the emotional terrain, but let me say it in any case. Life has some fundamental problems which might be, and I mean, it's absurd for me to claim to be able to speak about life because other thinkers far beyond architecture have the disciplines of life, the life sciences, the humanities. We are participants in this world, so let you know, I have to watch out for what I say. I am an architect, but I think that we could say that life has some particular problems, such as the condition of eutrophy. That sense in which things become efflorescent and compound so much that we go into a swamp, and then we encounter anoxia, the lack of oxygen, and things become so clotted that they start to rot and they're impacted and they flatline. Kind of a new homogeneity happens after extraordinary cycles of efflorescence of life. And in parallel to that biological condition of eutrophy, we have the example of something like The Sorcerer's Apprentice, that stage in Disney's Fantasia cartoon, where we've compounded, you know, the charm of the brooms. So we have 2 brooms to do our chores, and then those are 4, and then those are 8, and they're 16, and they infinitely double and become a nightmare and a deluge, which causes a tsunami, which drowns everybody. The sense that some things can go out of control in the power that we use. And if we encounter cancer and the frightening qualities that evinces, then we are in one of the most unspeakably frightening things right now in the out of control virus and the reality that we have not solved the cold, and that is one that we've learned to live with, but the coronavirus is one that is not compatible with life. And the capacity of learning to live with it is not known yet by any means. And so therefore, this raises the question of control, the necessity of control. And yet, this is a deeply thorny question. It's not good enough just to say, okay, well, we'll become responsible, because the last century has shown hideous results from trying to work with control. We could say, okay, the ISO movement with Mies van der Rohe and the colleagues between the wars was a beautiful thing, and somehow that resulted in a kind of a sharing, you know, of some unified standards in architecture. But if we look at the same thing in the life sciences, eugenics can only be spoken of with deep concern. We have no capacity to work with eugenics. And we have the specter of fascism as a reality, as a constant reality. as a contemporary reality, not just a historical trauma that happened. It's among us. And so therefore, this question of, okay, if this is extraordinarily powerful, the expansion of consciousness, for example, Mona, that you offer in your extraordinary new instruments, or the spatialization of it, Mümün, that you have in this beautiful way, then the question would be, how do we deal with the equivalent of eutrophy and anoxia? And how do we deal with the risk of fascism? In other words, is there a place for walls? How do you work with limits? Can limits and walls, rather than be instruments of fascism and conservatism, be positive here? Another way, for the beautiful sensing instruments that you're speaking about is that, when do we want to shut them off?
That's a very legitimate, question, and I'm thinking about it the whole time, and I'm getting questioned about, what if, what if the inner side of the people can be seen, and with all those authoritarian and the powers that they are going to take advantage of all this information, what would be the best or the limits of that? So I would say that for there is no limits at this point. It's like the cancer, as you mentioned, for the technology and the information and data. Data is the very key point of this century. And even at this point, all of our data are available in the clouds, in our cell phone, with the GPS tracking, there is no way to get rid of what it's growing. And there are always the positive and negative side to that. So since it's happening, and all this question even happened for the social media, for your text messages, for your car GPS, all the series and everything else in your phone that you are being heard, and there are a lot of news about it that we all know about that. Things are happening, and the growth of these wearable, devices are something that is being trend. Either for your health or tracking of your heart rate and so on. So the question for me is, since it's happening, how I can use this emergent technology or unknown technology that we are not aware of the result for the betterment of the people. So since you are using your Apple Watch and have all those biological data that are being shared, and you agree to the terms and conditions when you use the app. So what if those information can be used to moderate your emotion? Since it's happening, how we can change the directions of that and make something better in the built environment? But to answer to your question, honestly, I don't know what is the end or where we have to have that wall, because that's something I think it's out of our hand. That's something that is happening in the world, and either we can just see it and take a look at it, or we can go with it and try to make the betterment of that. As I mentioned, for me or for many other people, it was always the question that it will be scary, a world full of robots, but since they are growing, how I can make empathetic robots, how I can make something that it's more connected with the nature of the human being. It has compassion, and it makes more sense for me. It's more tangible. So that's what I'm trying to do. I don't have any authority to stop it, or I don't know where it goes, and I'm trying to contribute it in a very considerate, very thoughtful, and towards the human well-being, mental and physical well-being. And when I started doing that, I started with the autism kids and the people who had difficulties to express their emotion. And I thought that what if the built environment could be the medium of not informing the caregivers or the people around them, but also it can play the meditative role to calm down, the kids. And also it could somehow be preventative. So before the aggressive behavior happened, things can be mitigated and moderated. So I can, for me, the applications of that, not only just as a fancy, sensitive environment that has compassion, but how it can help the PTSD people or, kids with autism, or even the people with high anxiety and depression. So I think that's what I'm trying to do, to use this technology for the betterment of the human being. That's all I can say, but I don't know what would be the limit. But what I'm doing is that I always give the authority to the user to turn it off and on, to have it, involve or not. It's not something that you sign and will be there forever.
Yeah, I agree with Mona too. So about the walls and the borders, how far it can go, it can be defined, but I'm not sure that it's easy to define for now, because we don't have that yet in everyday life. We don't have that, that's not a norm yet. And especially about, for instance, in my case, I kind of introduced an intelligence for the architecture itself. And for me personally, the most important part was to, since we are like, how should I say it? Since our data have been collected all the time by using our computers, our smartphones, and so on, how can, like Mona said, how can this data can be used for a better way to enhance our lives, to help us for doing certain things and stuff like that. And in this case, for example, in my case, I want to kind of take away the function in architecture in some cases, and kind of the user defines the function, and the user defines what he or she may do in that certain space, and kind of enhance their working environment, living environment, or any kind of activity environment. But about the borders, it can't be defined yet, I think.
Can I add one quick comment, Philip? I think that was a really interesting example for the COVID time and this pandemic. I think since we are living people, we are alive, that adaptation is magical. So it has been around a year that we are all staying at home and we are quarantined. It has its own difficulties and challenges, but it's like the cancer, your body with the other different approaches like chemo and all those stuff start doing something or find a way as a workaround with encountering with that issue. I find the quarantine time very interesting. It take away many stuff from us, but in the same time, it offers a lot of other things that we didn't have that before. I forgot to hear the birds. I forgot to think about my feelings. I didn't have time to think about I'm stressed, but now I can feel that I'm stressed or I am happy. So I think there is a balance always between the takeaway stuff and the things that you gain. And because we are adaptive, we start finding the way to survive as part of the evolution.
The session that preceded this on interactive architecture, hosted by Behnaz Ferrari, showed some very moving work by Behnaz, which spoke of an embodiment, a kind of deep interweaving in which our consciousness is far from being just in our brain, but also is throughout our anatomy. Mona, you emphasize this I think in speaking about the parasympathetic anatomy, the topology that runs throughout our body. And it's very tempting to speak about that as an important start, perhaps, to this question, moving then also into the external qualities and the coupling that were offered in all of the groups. But I wonder whether that fundamental thought that half of our neurology lives outside of our cranium in our body, fully half, And like an octopus, there is no reason, no basis to the thinking, to the position that says that our thinking happens in our brain and not in our body. It happens in our neurology. I mean, this is simply a fact. The same dendritic material exists in the neurology that lives in the parasympathetic material. It's the same fundamental kind of cellular structure. The same synapses occur. The same currency occurs, and therefore it simply is not factual to talk about thinking occurring in the brain. Let's take that as a provocation anyway, and I wonder whether that is a sort of a helpful first step into the sense of navigating the thorny question of limits and boundaries. That is to say that the instruments that I believe that this set of projects is making allows an augmented human living being to be there as a fundamental kind of architecture. Perhaps that's why some of us love Iris van Herpen's work so much, because it seems to express this kind of fluctuating boundary existing a little beyond and also inside our own membranes, and in the sense that the world can be introjected into our body and not simply projected and cut and manipulated outward. Anyway, I mean, does it make sense to think that this is an architectural zone then? I mean, a kind of a fundamental medium that embodiment in very real ways could become a practical medium for a current architecture, helping to respond to Neil's very interesting provocation of what is a discipline? Well, then I would ask, okay, so what's the terrain of the discipline? And is it possible to say that the body can be part of the anatomy directly of architecture?
I think I love Andy Clark in Natural Born Cyber. You know, I think he's talking about how the human being, how we are, you know, natural born cyborg, and how our mind and selves or brain can be connected to the non-biological circuitry. So that cyber physical idea, it all comes from that exactly that embodiment that you're talking about, that how our brain can be connected through, you know, the profound sense of human technology symbionts. I think that's something that the technology is offering us, that the built environment could be the extension of our mind and body. And that's, I think, what I'm trying to do, that how we can have that cyber physical spaces, a new two-way interaction between human space and cyborg, you know, and how the biological spheres can integrate with the physical and data and informational one. I think I'm talking too much, so I will let the other panelists talk about. Sorry.
No, Mona, I mean, thank you very much. And Philip, thank you very much as well. I just wanted to say just a really short comment. Anyone else that wants to jump in, please. But I wanted to jump in about the idea of defining a field. I think in my research, I've been looking at how there is no distinction between the body, what you see and sense, and what is built. So it seems like that probably at the beginning of this research, when architecture, computational science, and engineering and all of this came as one. You know, Philip, you're a future seer. It seems like you're a philosopher, a builder, but you see things in the future. And I think that technology sometimes is slow. You talked about the idea of time and seeing it in different thresholds. But my question would be to everyone here, is your main motivation to make a living architecture like Philip was that Philip shared, the idea of a new type of discipline, or is it something more core? Like, what do you really want to say in your work?
I feel like that's a bit of a tricky question. I don't want to define my practice just from today. It's going to change, but I feel like if I were to start thinking about these concepts of embodiment, it would be more in the sense that I wouldn't set out to practice only to design kinetic sculptures and environments that move, even though that would be a dream. But I would also work to sort of like open a sense of awareness in people. We talked about how a lot of people fear technology, and I feel like before we start building walls around what are the limits of technology that we should explore, we should include other people in these experiences so they can spill their embodiment onto these structures that we create as well. So in order to overcome that fear, there's an interesting tension where if we embody our personal devices, if we become so attached to them, we're no longer scared of them. And that would probably help define us, some of these borders that we want to pass, or some of the borders that we might refrain from. So I guess going back to the practice question, I would love to sort of share experiences with people that would enable them to see things in new ways and sort of see how our embodiment is spilling onto these different objects and environments, and how these different spaces can afford us to behave in different ways.
I'd also like to hear from Zoe and Marina on this topic, because your work is so much about the performance, or at least the project that you showed us here, and storytelling. And in that, typically that kind of like theater moment is temporary and then you leave it. So it's not this kind of permanent built environment thing, but what is the longer residence perhaps of the kind of performances that you create that really affect the discipline at large?
Yes, mainly this project was more like an opportunity to reflect on this temporality and how all these biofeedback and interactions can highlight this unconscious engagement with spaces. So this could also be integrated in larger spaces like many of you have shown. And I am really interested in also in the previous things that you said about awareness and how we could include all audiences and all with different backgrounds and different affordances. So it's more like a starting point for us to reflect on this and see how it could be developed. Yes. And thank you for your comments.
Are there any other questions? I'm wondering if some of the speakers have questions for their other speakers here that you've seen in the work as well.
Don't be shy.
Well, if there are no further questions, we have been streaming for 2 hours now, and I'm sure our audience is tired as well as we're quite tired. I don't know, Gustavo, if you have any last questions, or Philip, just to wrap up.
Sure, I have one, but I wanted to actually read something very quickly. It's from the director of the Trans Lab, from Professor Marcos Novak, and this is addressing Philip. He basically said, to all beautiful work, thank you and congratulations. To Philip's question, in war, is art possible? I would propose in war is survival possible without art. In World War II, when people were giving up everything, including their lives, the last thing they gave up on, often even beyond food, was music. They held on to their music, song, instruments, all the way to the end. My follow-up to that would be, I read an article and an interview from Foucault and Deleuze talking about intellectuals and power and the difference between tools and weapons. What I saw today were beautiful tools, and I would argue instruments of a human evolution of the mind. And I thank everyone for your wonderful work. But to address Philip's question about war, I make work to inspire others. And today you guys have inspired me so greatly. And I thank Philip for all of his contributions through the many decades of work. And anyway, thank you.
Colleagues, in the private chat that is happening alongside the public work, our extraordinary colleague Neil Leach has been with us, and I want to invite Neil to join us and to share some words.
Thanks, Philip. No, I just wanted to say that I mean, I thought this work was really amazing today, and some time ago someone invited me to give a definition of architecture, and this was about 20 years ago, and I kind of made this comment that was a bit provocative at the time, that architecture is less about the construction of buildings than about imagining a better future world. And I think we saw today that there was something new emerging. I think already we've been challenged by the physicality of our space through our condition recently, and it's something new is emerging, and it's different. I think you guys are taking architecture as a discipline into a new domain, and I think this is very to be encouraged. I think something new is coming out, and we are safe in your hands. And I think that a more recent definition that I came up with myself is architecture is maybe about a sensibility, a way of thinking, a kind of gaze, a way of looking at the world, and that can be articulated in many different sort of ways. And increasingly now we're sort of seeing the use of these tools in a very, very imaginative sort of way, opening up the possibility of how we understand architecture. There's something that Philippa did years ago, and has been a constant sort of influence on everyone. It's really enhanced the field in the kind of physical, interactive kind of spaces that he was developing. Exquisitely beautiful, exquisitely beautiful. But I think there's another generation coming in that's kind of augmenting that and taking it even further, which I saw today, and I was blown away. And it kind of, in some senses, the only thing I'd say is that I think architecture also is, to my mind, trying to set up a space like this for this interaction. That's always been my perception of also of architecture. And I'm just fantastic. I just think it's so gratifying for all the team that's been working so hard to make Digital Futures happen. And it's been all completely voluntary work. It's been an amazing contribution. To see that actually we're seeing these kind of results coming through, whereby we're sharing these ideas, and people all over the world are getting these ideas. It's not about, I know that some of you have studied at a very expensive place like the AA and so on, but it's not about, having the money to go somewhere. I think ideas should be spread, and everyone should be engaging with this thing. And I hope that this, we're going to have this recording is going to be uploaded and so on. And I hope that everyone all over the world will benefit from this, in places like Bangladesh and less privileged parts, because inspiration is not, and talent is not based on your ability to go to these expensive places, but it's fantastic to see this work. So I would just say carry on. You know, I think that you're the next generation. I mean, you're the future, and you're taking it into interesting new, charting new spaces, new ways of thinking that is keeping architecture alive. And I think in some ways, you know, living architecture is also about architecture itself being alive, and this is a kind of something that is moving on and developing and growing in a fascinating new way. So, well, I'll say no more. I get too emotional, but I think Philip will probably agree with that. This is really an example of living architecture.
Neil, I can't resist echoing what you've just said, and perhaps to underline one or two things, because I think you've given an extraordinary provocation. One, that we are in good hands. I agree. There have been some earlier works, but you are the future, and you should be confident in what you're doing, because you're showing the intelligence and the sensitivity and the inclusion, the ethical framework to be able to carry that responsibility. I spoke about the Hippocratic Oath. I think that you're building that kind of framework as we speak, but without too much gravitas, with degrees of irony and instability as well that keep it moving as opposed to stuck in a kind of moral righteousness. The quality of levity is also and is also so extraordinarily important, I believe. But Neil's also said something very striking, I think, in the sense that this is not privileged work. In fact, it's accessible work. We saw that directly in some of the work. I mean, Mona, I think that you are using open source material in the open BCI framework, BCI meaning brain computer interface, which people with access to a neighborhood hack lab can build literally for a few dollars. And perhaps a few dollars is still tough, but it's very different than the specter of this being accessible only to the most endowed labs in the most august places after you've taken out the membership and have the relationships that mean that you are part of an elite. It's so very important for this work to be accessible and inclusive, so that the kind of errors of the Enlightenment, making an elite society create a museum, instead can be shared constantly. And the idea that a kitchen sink kind of enactment of the interactive systems that you've offered, the sentient systems that you've offered, is possible just by putting a penny and a piece of tin into a potato, or perhaps pouring some vinegar into a jar and making electrodes and making our own electricity out of that, and the sense that physical computing is something that any child can start to experience, perhaps turns a dimension of this project into a kind of mission for STEAM, that is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and art, accompanied by art, STEAM, becoming something that is one of our responsibilities and our opportunities too, so that we can learn from the wisdom of children and indeed of animals and plants and of the natural world, so that they can be part of our consciousness. So it's not simply kind of a kind of noblesse oblige to give more, but rather to learn for, to learn from, to learn with, and to share.
Thank you so much, Philip, for all of your feedback on this panel today. Thank you so much, Neil, and to all of the presenters. I think that this was some amazing work. I would like to mention that all of you should definitely keep in touch and continue to share your research with the world. And next week, we're going to have a presentation on AI and creativity. I don't know, Neil, if you want to mention anything about that, but we're really looking forward to it because Neil will be hosting.
Well, I just want to say that Refik Anadol is going to be there, and if there's someone who's even more impressive than you guys, it's been Refik. And you know, I think what I want to say about Refik's work is, and it actually applies to your work as well, is the sense of creativity is not just simply about working within a kind of set of boundaries, but actually it's about really redefining those boundaries and redefining what it is to be an architect. And I think Refik has opened up a new space of opportunity. He's not an architect, but architecture is both his material and also his canvas in a way. And I think that there's something new that's very special that's happening that is really astonishing at the moment. And I think it's to do with a whole kind of conflagration, coming together, shall we say, of different impulses and things. And what I really enjoyed was not just the kind of that you're breaking out the boundary of architecture and bringing on board ideas and technologies that really were not there in architecture a while back. I mean, Mona's comments about Andy Clark, I mean, I think, he is fundamental to thinking about how we move forward. I know that Benaz invited him a couple of weeks ago and he couldn't come because he's too busy, but it's wonderful to know that we're charting new territory. We're not stuck in this old domain, but it's moving forward. So anyway, Refik's going to be there next week, and also some of the guys from Saka are also doing some fabulous new stuff. So I would like to thank you for being so creative, because it's really taking us into new directions, and thank you so much. Thank you also to Virginia for hosting this, and to Gustavo putting it together, and so on, the whole team behind it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Amazing work and amazing discussion.
Well, I mean, if that's pretty much it, I wanted to thank everyone. I wanted to especially thank Philip, our distinguished moderator, and my hero. And thank you, Neil, for exciting preview of next week. And Virginia, you have the last word, so take us home.
Oh no, I don't have the last word. I'd like all of our presenters to speak up, because they're saying such wonderful things in the chat about each other and about everything. So as we head out, each of you just say your goodbyes to one another, and hopefully this isn't the end. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
You. That was so exciting. It made my day. Nice to know you guys.
Yeah, nice to meet all of you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.